Our next panel, titled Evolution of America's Space Security Policy, will be moderated by Laura Winter, editor and host at the Defense and Aerospace Report. Please welcome our speakers, Christine Fox, Senior Advisor at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, J.P. Parker, Founder and CEO at Escape Velocity, and Winston Beauchamp, Vice President of Intelligence Systems at Boeing.
All right. Oh, that's how it worked. Now it's on. Now I can say good morning to everybody. How is everybody doing?
Is this interesting?
Yeah, are we warm enough yet? Because my goodness, it's cold. Woo. All right. I would like to set one thing straight. Yes, my name is Laura Winter. Yes, I am an editor and host. And yes, I do work for the Defense and Aerospace Report. But I actually edit and host the Downlink podcast, which covers things about space, the space business, and defense. If I didn't say that, my boss, Vago, who was here yesterday, would probably be a bit annoyed with me. Anyhow, we're here to talk about space and power projection, hard power, soft power, and economic power. That power depends on policies that support and secure our space systems, the ability to conceive, develop, deploy, and successfully use these technologies in the space domain. And I think that all of us here, right, we're here at the AI plus Space conference, I think we all understand that this ability is a measure of national power. You can't be a superpower without sovereign space systems. We're also not the only nation state with highly capable space systems. And the question before us isn't whether space matters. We know that already. The question is, how will America lead in this domain? The orbits above us, radio spectrum, even the moon, are contested and essential to our national security and our economy. We're fortunate to have three fabulous panelists who've helped us shape the evolution of U.S. national security space policy from distinct vantage points. Directly across from me is Christine Fox, Senior Advisor at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, whose distinguished career includes service as Acting Deputy Secretary of Defense and Director of CAPE. You've got to actually explain what CAPE is. That gives her a long view of how strategy, acquisition, and innovation intersect across the national security enterprise. To my left is J.P. Parker, founder and CEO of Escape Velocity, who in 2017 through 2018 was the senior advisor for space to the vice president, and who in 2018 became the very first intelligence community's first space executive. Yes, I did say first twice, but hey, just had to underline it. Helping unify how we understand space threats and intelligence integration. That is JP's forte. And then we've got Winston Beauchamp, who spent 29 years in civil service, including as the director overseeing the Air Force's Special Access Program portfolio. That means he knows a lot of really secret, crazy stuff. And the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Information. And he is now at Boeing for defense, as the Vice President of Intelligence Systems. So could we just give them a quick round of applause and, do that? Because they've done some really amazing work, right? So thank you guys. Thank you, Christine, JP, Winston, for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we've got a very capable competitor, right? That's the Chinese. They have a space station, a functioning robotic foothold on the moon's south pole. They practice dogfighting with maneuvers with their satellites. We also have Russia. The United States and its allies strongly believe it has a program to arm its satellites with nuclear warheads. We also have a growing number of space-aspiring nations developing launch capabilities. It was just about 10 days ago that South Korea launched its 3-stage Nuri rocket from a spaceport on an island off that nation's southwestern coast. And we have a mushrooming commercial sector that hails from almost every corner of the world. And I do mean that. I mean, Nigeria has a commercial space community that is developing technologies. And according to Space Capital, 2,286 new space companies have attracted $393 billion in investment since 2009. So, JP, how have the threats and the competition for the space domain changed over the past 5 years? Or maybe we should make it 6 years, right? Because it's been about 6 years since the founding of the Space Force. You know, what would you characterize perhaps as the Sputnik moment of this century?
Thank you, Laura, and I appreciate SCSP for having me here, and thank you all for hanging out here this second day to hear a bunch of space professionals talk to you about things that are not necessarily AI specific, but we'll try to weave that into the discussion. And the question is a very good one. I think the first thing I would say is that you're all to get credit for showing up here to talk about space and AI. AI is a hot topic. Everybody wants to talk about it. Space is a hidden topic. When you leave the Beltway, when you leave space professionals and policy wonks behind, most people, I think, take space for granted and don't realize how dependent their life and America's way of life is on space. The adversaries we have, and you're talking to a bunch of national security people here, so we're going to focus a lot on national security. The adversaries have watched our dominance in space with envy, and they've decided that if conflict comes with the United States, they must find a way to neutralize our advantage in space. People don't realize the first space war has already happened in the 1990s. Chinese military observers watched how the United States dealt in the first Gulf War with its adversary Iraq, and they decided that they had to have a national program to not only create space capabilities that were comparable to what the United States had, but to also create the capability to deny us space. What they realized is that space was an enormous force enabler for a terrestrial fight. So the United States used space very effectively, and China embarked on a multi-decade program to neutralize our advantage in space. I would say, to the point about the Sputnik moment, we've actually had a lot of Sputnik moments in the last decade or two. The sheer pace, scale, and breadth of what China has accomplished in space is staggering by any measure. And they have continually surprised us with the rate of progress that they've made, not only in their space developments, but in their counterspace developments. That is, the things that would neutralize our advantage in space. I'll give you just a couple. China launched an anti-satellite missile in the 2000s that destroyed one of their defunct weather satellites. It created more space debris in that one event than all the other space debris that had ever been created. About a third of all of our space debris was from that one very reckless test they did. But they did it to prove a point and to tell us something, that our satellites are vulnerable to them. The next Sputnik moment I would mention occurred just a couple of years ago. They fired what looked like what could be an intercontinental ballistic missile on a test flight, but it went into orbit, and it had a payload, so then it became a spacecraft. But rather than stay in space, it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and conducted high-speed hypersonic maneuvering. This is a new type of weapon system that, frankly, the United States doesn't have and is scrambling to figure out how to deal with. They demonstrated the ability to do something that we have not been able to demonstrate. This is a Sputnik moment for the military and therefore for the nation. So I would tell you that the biggest issue we have right now is trying to figure out how to move as fast or faster than they are.
And if anybody wants to look up what that weapon system is, just for everybody in the crowd, because I see a lot of people on computers and stuff, it's known by the acronym of FOBS, which is a fractional orbital bombardment system. Hey, JP, just real quick, you do have a paper out today, right?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I'm publishing a paper with the National Security Space Association today. I'm actually going to be up on stage after lunch a little bit, talking more about it. It is a paper that basically hypothesizes what happens if we lose space. A day without space is something we've all talked about in policy circles. It's something I think the American public is oblivious to. And so hang around after lunch and we'll talk about what the implications are for a day without space.
Christine, That's quite a picture, right? So have America's policies, institutions, capabilities, have they kept up with the rapid changes in the space domain?
Well, thank you, Laura, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I think we all know the answer to that question is no. So you said, what's CAPE, right? CAPE is still, when I was there, it was named Cost Assessment Program Evaluation. What a boring name. Basically what it means is that we were responsible for figuring out what the DoD program was. What did we buy with the money we got, right? So of course all the military departments and services participate. It's a team effort. Team in quotes, but there's no conflict over budgets, no, none at all. But space and space
This is when you sharpen the pencils.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, and worry some about the decimal dust. But at any rate, the space programs in my times, this was a while ago, they were all very bespoke systems. They were very long-term systems. Almost every single space program was behind schedule and over cost, to the point of causing some of our operational commanders to come in and sort of jump up and down and say we are facing severe threats, severe concerns. And this was before the picture that JP just mentioned. So what's happened in the last 10 years? I think it's better, okay? I think it's better. So there is some good news. First of all, I think commercial space is making a huge difference in our system. But we have a lot of work to do to really figure out how to bring commercial space capabilities into this complex picture that JP is laying out. But they're able to go faster. And I think the Defense Department, the intelligence community are figuring out how to tap it better. But I do bemoan the fact that we no longer have a Space Council, a forum where we can talk openly with our national security providers, our defense industrial base providers. We still need these highly capable systems, but also our commercial potential partners about the opportunities, but also the risks. Because those commercial partners, they face the risks from these threats, and are we telling them that? Are we going to help them with that? Do they even know that? And on the national security side, if we're dependent on them, what if they decide tomorrow, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore?
Let me jump in real quick.
Please, go ahead.
Just because I know that we're not at the epicenter of space beltway nerdiness here in this room, explain the Space Council, right?
Sure.
It hasn't met since December of 2023. The law that created the Space Council requires any administration, doesn't matter who it is, to convene a Space Council meeting at least once every 12 months, right? So we haven't had one now for, well, 2 years in a row. So that's kind of a F up. But the Space Council is kind of a foundation of an all-of-government approach to space.
That's right.
Could you just illustrate what that is? Because
Sure.
then I think others would benefit.
Sure, but I want JP to jump in because JP was very, very essential to the Space Council in the
Yeah.
first Trump administration, which is where we first worked together. But I'll just give the big answer. You can come in if you would, please. But in my perspective, the Space Council, as it was manifested, was basically a very formal National Security Council meeting about space. I think what I'd love it to become, if we could rekindle it, is more of an open conversation about the risks and opportunities to include bespoke systems, but also commercial technology. I think we were on that path when it was meeting more regularly, but we didn't achieve the full potential. But I'd love it if JP would chime in on that.
The only thing I would add to that, Christine, is that, and I'll paraphrase the vice president who really pushed hard to reinstitute the Space Council. The law and the idea behind the Space Council actually goes back to the 1990s. In those days, the National Security Council took care of DoD and intelligence community space, and the Space Council was really viewed as an oversight body for NASA. And there really wasn't a commercial space sector to worry about. In 2017, when the Vice President decided to reinstitute the Space Council, his comment, and I'm paraphrasing, was this: if you're going to have a competition internationally, including against China, you have to marshal your whole of nation resources. And that means combining the best of civil space, national security space, and the now emergent commercial space sector. That's what the Space Council rationale was in 2017, a way to unify the United States policies so that you can exploit every element of our space, not just the national security or civil space.
And I think it's notable that the Space Council also had members that weren't from a space or defense background as well. I mean, the Department of Agriculture was there, right? So a whole of government approach. I mean, the Department of Education was there thinking about STEM and how to create a workforce that would carry these things forward. Anyway, I just wanted to
let's face it, space is a real inspiration for people to go into STEM fields, right? And it has been forever. So I think you're exactly right.
It's a team sport.
Let me make one quick point. To Christine's credit, she was at the Department of Defense, bringing them forward to talk about a space war game. We ended up having a space war game that involved the majority of the cabinet. And I will tell you, one of the comments that was made was that people throughout the cabinets, these are secretaries of organizations like the Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, were surprised how dependent their functioning was on space. And I think that was one of the key insights.
Yeah, it was fun.
So a key dependency on space systems is the Department of Defense. So Winston, space and America's capabilities in space are vital to our warfighters. You know, what evolution have you seen in some of our most important space capabilities for the warfighter?
Well, sure. So thanks, Laura, and thanks for SCSP for having us here. It's my pleasure. Significant changes over the past 2 decades, really, in this realm, and some of it driven by technology, some of it driven by the threat. And you see investments in areas that expand both in terms of volume and in terms of additional performance. One of the approaches that we took when I first came to the Pentagon in 2016 to be the Deputy Undersecretary for Space was a real emphasis on resilience. We knew that there were threats against space, as JP described. We knew that adversaries understood the degree to which we depended upon space to execute maneuvers on the ground. And so we said, well, yes, we need to find ways to counter that approach. And we built a matrix that described how you would address the resilience problem. In some cases, it was, what do I do to protect what I have? What do I do to hide what I have? What do I do to proliferate it so that it makes it more difficult to eliminate a US space capability? By changing the cost equation. If you can disaggregate your mission or just build more of something, it really makes it much more expensive to eliminate that entirely, and maybe they'll look somewhere else in the chain. And what I've seen is that the investment on this bespoke systems that Christine talked about is still happening, and there's much more alignment and integration with the capabilities that commercial systems are building, because there's been more dialogue on what the performance requirements might be, to slide in underneath those bespoke systems and provide another tier of capability. So you might find that a really high-end national system continues to operate and get better over time, and then there's a commercial system that might be able to act as a backup in the event of the emergence of a threat that would take it out.
Do you want to give an example of that? Like
ISR? Sure.
SAR?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the intent behind the commercial imagery strategy, which started as far back as 2001. The intent was to make sure that there was a robust U.S. commercial imagery sector that could provide capabilities in the event of an outage, whether technical or intentional by an adversary. And so out of that, the commercial imagery industry was born. At first, it was a smaller version of what the national systems were building and buying. That was basically aligned to the requirements of a commercial or civil customer base. Now, if you look at where that whole field has grown, it's very much focused on revisit, not so much imagery resolution. And you now have large proliferated constellations of small satellites that provide near total 24-hour coverage around the world for a robust series of commercial customers. And so that evolution over time has also served our needs because that is largely a US industry base.
So I just want to go on with that real quick, because when I was preparing for this conversation and I was thinking about SAR, which is synthetic aperture radar, just for everybody, and it's really powerful because it can take imagery from space through any weather, right? So when, what was it, about 3 months ago, there was a submarine in North Korea, or it was a ship. It was a ship that had been launched and it didn't really go very well. The North Koreans put it under a tarp, and SAR could see right through it. So we could see everything. And another really critical thing about Earth observation is that we could see what happened in Bucha, right, in Ukraine. So we know when people are doing really, really bad things and then try to tell tales that are different. So I kind of want to wonder if these capabilities also served as a deterrent against aggression.
Yeah, I think it will. It hasn't up till now because really Ukraine was the first time that we were able to use that to such effect, and we were willing to allow that information to be released. So when JP and I were at the ODNI, Office of Director of National Intelligence back in from 2012 to 15 timeframe, we had a concept called radical transparency, where we said, we are so far ahead of the rest of the world in these areas that we can afford to maybe open up the aperture a little bit and expose more information if it furthered some other national goal. In this case, we did that at the start of the Ukraine conflict in order to expose to the rest of the world exactly what was happening. Russia did not think we were going to do that. Russia thought we were going to continue to do what we had done for decades, which was hold that information close so as not to reveal things like sources and methods. But the emergence of a robust commercial marketplace allows us to make that data available quickly in a timely manner so that we don't have to expose sources and methods, but we can still put the information on the news, in the newspapers, and in the internet, in front of people very, very quickly. So I believe that that was a shock to the system, and that going forward, that has to be factored into adversaries' calculations, that when you commit atrocities, when you deploy weapon systems and then publicly say, I'm not doing that, the evidence can be quickly generated to show that yes, you are.
Which is also a point why space domain awareness is also very important, right?
That's right.
Laura, could I just
Sure.
chime in really quickly? So Winston made a really important point about the role of commercial in resilience. Yep. I do think that that's a very important role, but I just want to add, in the last couple of years, I'm sensing a bit of a shift to some use of commercial for primary. And I think it's a new thing. I'm on the privilege of being on the board of Muon Space, and I just see some of the inquiries that they get. They have a very capable IR sensor for wildfire detection, FireSat. It's, IR detection kind of has a lot of opportunities. So I see some of the inquiries. And so while I agree primarily in the past commercial has played this resilience role, I think if you think about Starlink, for example, that's no longer a resilience role. Mm-hmm. We are really dependent on that for communication. So the commercial role, I think, is shifting from backup, in some cases, to primary.
Yeah, that's a great point. In the Starlink example, of course, now there is a government architecture built by the same company called Star Shield, which is the primary for military operations, but it relies upon that large commercial constellation for robustness as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fantastic points. JP, back over to you. During your time at the White House, you played an instrumental role in establishing the Space Force, because we are talking about securing our space systems, right? And they were established specifically for that. You were there for the establishment of Space Command. Now, as you look back, have these two institutions lived up to the intent of their founders? What other augmentation needs to be done? What's the path forward to strengthen both of them?
So I'm going to speak as a personal opinion, this does not reflect any position from the Department of Defense or the intelligence community which I've been associated with. And I get a lot of feedback that people disagree with what I'm about to say, so I'll just tell you these are my opinions only. The idea of a separate Space Force was actually around a long time. And it was kicked around and never fully supported until 2019 when we created the Space Force as a result of presidential direction. The idea that space was subordinate in the Department of the Air Force was always a concern of people, and had to do with resources priorities, people getting promoted, and space was considered a less than first tier requirement for the United States Air Force. So the creation of the Space Force changes the calculus on one level, which is that it elevates as its space a priority that needs its own fighting force for the reasons we've talked about. Our American way of life depends on it.
And its own seat on the Joint Chiefs.
Absolutely. It's a co-equal branch, a military branch just like all the others. I will say that if you were here yesterday, General Raymond, who's the father of the Space Force, the very first chief of space operations, a man I respect very greatly, he said a couple of things in response that he might have done differently. One of the ideas he mentioned yesterday, which I think bears repeating, is that the Space Force, in his opinion, should have been and should be the first digital service. And he was informed by young people in the Space Force that that could be done. And I don't believe enough has been done to recognize this simple fact. The Space Force does not matter how many people it has at its core. And in the Pentagon and in policy circles, people talk about it's only got 100,000 people. We need more people if we're going to have a military service. And he cited yesterday the fact that just being in the Pentagon requires people to go to meetings. That's not really why we want a Space Force or need a Space Force. A Space Force at its core, if you think about it in the future, and when you think about AI-enabled Space Force, these are computers in space. They are networked together. We're operating without human intervention in a lot of cases, and the humans are safely ensconced on Earth. They're not floating around in spacecrafts. That's a different kind of fighting force. Now, as conflict moves to space, the Space Force will have to be a digital, automated, not a labor-intensive organization. And I believe that they have to get an understanding of that and work that through the Pentagon so that they're not counting people in order to determine how strong the Space Force is. They're counting the items in space that are able to operate autonomously. And that's where they have to focus, and more work is needed there.
Which goes wonderfully into the next question, which I'm actually going to toss to both Winston and Christine. For both of you, in your last assignments, you were focused on the integration of artificial intelligence, and we are at an artificial intelligence conference, right? So what is your view of the current level of emphasis on AI in the Department of Defense and the Space Force? Because if it's going to be a digital force, well, that's kind of key, right? So is it more than just a flashy word that everyone's sort of following around and say, I want this on my satellite bus? How is this going to work? How is it going to actually improve the capabilities for the warfighter?
So there's two main points regarding that issue. The first is, when you look at how AI is used in the Department of Defense today, there's really a couple of branches of work underway. The first is very much in alignment with how AI has traditionally been used long before the ChatGPTs of the world became popular, and that is automation for autonomy, whether it's in the air, in space, undersea. That work is very bespoke, very specialized, and largely specialized software that is built for systems that have to operate for long periods of time without human intervention. And that work has continued throughout all of the latest hullabaloo.
Well, the Mars landers.
Exactly. And so you still have a lot of human intervention, but there has to be some autonomy in between. And there's been a tremendous amount of work done in this area, and I can speak to the Department of the Air Force in everything from heads-up displays for pilots that help filter the information that the pilot sees, to the operations of a loyal wingman that can follow the pilot and execute their commands autonomously over time. The same is true for maritime scenarios, underwater situations where you simply program the mission and then you give it the contingencies to how it responds when things happen that maybe you don't anticipate. That's a tremendous amount of investment in that arena, and that's being done with folks with a great deal of specialized skills. What's really changed is how the commercial applications for large language models has also started to transform the work that is done in the business side of the Department of War. And that is something that's much more akin to the experience of commercial industry and academia to AI. So we're going through the same evolution at transforming finance and acquisition, contracts management, logistics, which industry is going through. And we're going to see a great deal of efficiencies associated with it, taking work out of every process. And the department is one that has no shortage of bureaucracy and process. And so as a result of that, there's a tremendous amount of potential. And it's not a matter of getting rid of the people. It's allowing those people to move up market. And the last thing I'll say on this is, a few years ago, we tried to put a lasso around what we called AI and have a governance process to management. Classic departmental approach, right? To his credit, then Secretary Kendall for the Department of the Air Force said, stop. What we consider AI today, in 5 years, we're just going to call software. In the same way that the software that we use today, 10 years ago would be indistinguishable from magic. So it's not a static position that you want to try to delineate. It's a continual progression. It's a evolution that you want to ride as opposed to try to contain and manage. Put your guardrails in place, understand what ethical AI means, ensure that you have the controls to manage that part of the process, but don't try to carve it off and handle it separately from a budgetary or requirement standpoint. You get some really perverse incentives if you do that, right? Where you start saying, what are your AI requirements? Well, anything could be, or nothing. So rather, it's a tool that you use to get your work done instead of a separate thing.
So I think that it's a tool is a really great point, but I have good news and bad news about AI from my perspective. Of course, I'm not in the department anymore, so it's a distant perspective. But from places like the Applied Physics Lab, I'm able to work with the department on operationalizing AI. And so in the good news category, I feel the operating forces have got it. And I am working now on a project looking at how AI is being incorporated into all of our operational leaders, our combatant commanders. All of them are working hard to adopt artificial intelligence tools in helping them more rapidly assess the situation and make decisions. And I mean, I hate to use overused words, but I'm going to use unprecedented. The growth in the adoption of these tools in the operating forces in just the last less than 2 years, from Ukraine to today, let's just say, it's amazing. Every combatant command are using these tools, and they're using them all the time. And the ones that are engaged in conflict, it's a part of their decision-making process. That's amazing, right? That's great news. The bad news is we're not very good in the department about getting our data together, right? So I think that on the business opportunities, on even operational use of it, the data, we have to do better to get the data. So I'll circle now to space, right? What's one of our most exciting sources of data? Space. And we've just talked about how commercial space is exploding, and there's lots now of new sources of data. We've really got to get our arms around how we're going to wrangle all that data so that we can take advantage of the power of artificial intelligence. I think everybody's aware. That's a good thing, right? but we're a little slow in the department sometimes of really dealing with these hard problems. And let's face it, who owns the data has some power, so giving that up is never easy in our wonderful world of DOD or DOW. Sorry. So anyway, I would like to just say one other thing that pick up on JP's point. The notion of man, train, and equip, the role of the service leaders needs to be rethought with artificial intelligence, and perhaps the Space Force should be the leading rethinker. Because what is man in space with artificial intelligence and full up autonomy? I agree completely. We're not looking at numbers of people anymore. Just pick cyber. In my time, the solution to every cyber problem was more people. People are the most expensive thing in the department. People don't understand that, but it's true. Every person you add, that's a big bill. And the solution to every cyber problem was people. Well, now we have artificial intelligence. Let's hope we can change that, right? And again, space is going to play a role and is also vulnerable to cyber. So there's just so many opportunities to rethink what we mean by man, train, and equip today.
Just one quick rebuttal to this. The point about data is key. And this is one where I think the intelligence community does a really good job. And the department has work to do. Because in the IC, we made a clear statement, a policy that says you don't own the data just because you generated it. It's a corporate asset, and it's there for the greater good. And thus you have an obligation to contribute it to the systems and tools that are promoting the greater good. Great point.
I'll just add to Christine's point that the adding people adds cost, and it also adds indirect cost in the sense that one of the most important things for bureaucrats is to have decision authority. So more people not only costs more, it slows things down.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are running out of time, so I'm going to have to skip past a number of questions that I really wanted to get to, but I am going to give you the last question. I want to know about the seed corn to avoid strategic technological surprise. There is a concern that the planned Space Futures Command will remain just a plan. And I realize that the Space Force is aiming to release some documents that consider the operating environment 15 years out. But a criticism of these documents, and these documents are appreciated, so it's a friendly criticism. It's not one that can really be avoided. But the criticism is that what will be imagined in these documents will be simply based on what is possible now, extrapolated out 15 years, right? So how do we prepare for what we cannot actually foresee, right? How do we avoid a Sputnik moment? How do we avoid another fractional orbital bombardment system development? Or at least, get our brains around that so we're not as technologically surprised or strategically surprised. And who wants to hack at that one first?
I'll start the ball rolling. Sputnik, the Sputnik moment was when Russia launched, before we, the first Earth orbiting satellite. It sent a crisis through the United States government. Part of what the United States government did was create 3 organizations to deal with this. They created NASA. They created what we now know to be the National Reconnaissance Office. That would be the organization that puts our spy satellites up so that we can observe what's happening. And they created an organization that we now call DARPA. It's originally called ARPA. The mission of DARPA is to prevent technological surprise, the exact phrase you used. I spent 16 years in industry working with DARPA as my primary customer. The problem is that we have enormous sources of innovation available to us for national security. In fact, if you go to the Department of Defense website, the Chief Technology Officer has a scrolling doom list of 269 organizations that provide innovations to the Department of Defense. The problem is what we call the Valley of Death. Whether you're creating something at DARPA, whether you're creating something at a national lab, whether you're creating something in academia, you have to get over the, quote, valley of death and into a program of record that can deliver things to the military. The current acquisition reforms and the focus on speed are designed to shorten that and make it much more easy to get a good idea to be implemented. But I will tell you, and Winston is going to engage on this, the thing that keeps Chinese military planners up at night, there's about 4 things, but one of them is the United States has innovations that they usually pop out as a surprise to the detriment of our adversaries. And that keeps the Chinese war planners scared and alert to what it is we're up to. So being good at transitioning our good, innovative ideas is going to be a huge focus, and it's going to be a game changer if we ever have to go to conflict.
So I'm just going to pile on to that because I really agree with it. This is not just a problem in space, right? Every program the department has, it is built on requirements that are informed by the threat projections at that time. And by the time they field, almost always the threat has advanced in ways we didn't anticipate. So whether it's ships or aircraft or submarines or space, this is a problem the department has had. And as the pace of change has accelerated, it's a bigger and bigger problem. And I do think the acquisition reform initiatives that are in place or under discussion or actually, I guess, happening, but I don't say that I fully understand them all, but that's okay. The change is in recognition of that. So one of the things I'll put out there is, what is our solution? We need to keep that innovation machine invigorated, whether it's in our universities, in our research labs, or in our commercial sector. They have to be inspired and invigorated to be innovative all the time. And the department has to have an ability to know what they're doing and reach in and grab it. We're not so good at that. I am actually starting to question this whole notion of the valley of death leading to a program of record. Skip it. Why do you need a program of record? Buy it. If it's good and it's going to serve your need, let a contract for it. That is starting to happen in software. Haven't seen it happen in hardware yet. Maybe it is. I think maybe some of the new autonomous systems that's starting to happen. But it's a hard question. The program of record gives you a lot. It gives you stability, it gives you a good program manager, it gives you a budget, it gives you a whole bunch of things. But it also slows you down. So what are the alternatives? But I think the solution is to maintain our innovation ecosystem.
Before you answer, I just want to ask, though, that when innovation happens, a lot of times, especially in the commercial sector, they're waiting for a demand signal. They're waiting for a requirement, right? They're waiting for somebody with stars on their shoulder saying, hey, I want this thing to work in this way, and therefore somebody go off and make it. But how do we get after or get ahead of that requirement? How do we imagine what these warfighters are going to need 15 years, 20 years down the road? Because that technology development has to start now.
Yeah, so actually the answer to both of these is kind of the same. And it's that, the requirements process that we've been using up until last month when it was replaced was based in an era when the source of technological advancement was the US federal government. That's not true, and it hasn't been true for a long time. But we kept using the same requirements process, pretending as if it was true. And what that created was the valley of death that JP talked about, because you'd have requirements pull competing with technology push, and they didn't match up exactly, and so we wound up in a perverse place where we would recreate systems to get that last 1% of requirements that the push technology didn't fulfill, because you had to meet all of the requirements or else you didn't qualify to compete for the program of record.
The 100% solution versus the 85.
That's right.
Make it work.
That's right. And so the new system that the department has put in place now is, as described at least, intended to support an 85% solution that would be evolvable over time into the future and provide additional capabilities where it was necessary to do so, but with always informed by the cost associated with that. And so that's really the answer to both these questions. We are leveraging capabilities that have been invented in industry, and that investment pipeline must continue. It only will continue if we see examples where when it gets built, it gets bought.
If I could also just quickly add, I know, we, I believe, need to change what we think of as the definition of national security community. That has determined sort of a group of people, a group of industries, and I think that needs to be blown up. Forums like this are very helpful for that, but we need more of them. We need access to innovators that never saw themselves as participating in national security, because it's really up to all of us to meet these challenges.
Christine, JP, Winston, thank you all very much for joining me today. And everybody out here, please give them a round of applause. We've run out of time.
Thank you.
Next,